1/3 of your brain's cortex is engaged in vision. When you simply open your eyes and look around, you're engaging billions of neurons and trillions of synapses when you just simply open your eyes and look around this room. Now that might be a little surprising because to most of us, if we think about vision at all, we think of vision as being like a camera. There is a 3D world out there with depth, shapes, objects, and colors, and vision, like a camera, just takes a snapshot of the objective reality that's out there. The problem with that theory is, why would we need 1/3 of our highest processing power engaged in vision if we're just taking a picture? What cognitive neuroscience has discovered, and computer vision research, is that your brain is actually a reality engine. There is a part of your visual system that is like a camera. The eye has a lens which focuses an image on the back of the eye, where there's a piece of neural tissue called the retina. It has about 120 million photoreceptors. It's like a 120 megapixel camera. It has blood vessels to support all this processing and about several hundred million interneurons that are doing a lot of sophisticated processing of the image at the eye. It's a very, in some sense, marvelous design. In another way, it's an example of unintelligent design. The photoreceptors have the blood vessels and all the interneurons in front of them. Light has to go from the lens through all that stuff before it gets to the photoreceptors. So much of the light gets absorbed by the interneurons and the blood vessels before it even gets to the photoreceptors that are supposed to catch the light. Bad design. As a result of that, all of the neurons have their axons in the middle of the eye, and you have to get them out. So to make up for the kludge of the design of the eye, you have to punch a hole in the retina to get all the axons out in the optic nerve. So you have one kludge to make up for another kludge. If I were giving a grade, I would give an F for this kind of design. It doesn't have to be this way. Cephalopods, such as the octopus, have it right. The photoreceptors are in front, the interneurons and blood vessels are behind, there's no blind spot in the octopus eye. So we just got the bad model. We got the flunk model, and the octopus got the good model. So there is a part of vision that's like a camera, it's the eye. But the rest of vision, the 1/3 of your cortex that's involved in vision, is, neuroscience has found, like a reality engine. In real time, when you open your eyes and look around you, in real time, you're creating all the depths, colors, motions, shapes, and objects that you're seeing. That's why 1/3 of your brain's highest processing power is involved. Now, I know that's hard to believe, that we're actually creating what we see on the fly. So I'm going to go low tech. If we can just hit these two tabletops, do they look to be the same shape or different? They look quite different, right? This one looks long and thin. That one looks short and fat. In fact, they're identical. I'll demonstrate it. You would agree that that fits perfectly? I'll just rotate it. And it fits perfectly there. This is acetate. You can check after the talk. It doesn't stretch. And that's why I'm doing this low tech. If it was on the computer, you would say he could do anything he wants. So your visual system is creating all the depths that you see. And in this case, we know the rules with mathematical precision. We actually can predict that you'd see this kind of incorrect depth. Another example. I have some discs that I cut some lines out of. I'm going to put some more discs on there. And if I line them up just right, do you see something new? There's now, you saw the way I constructed it with two separate slides, there were no lines on those slides, right? That's why I did two at a time, two separately. Your visual system is hallucinating the lines that you see between the disks. That's entirely your conscious construction. You're constructing that glowing line. And then you build another hallucination on top. Once you've got the hallucinated lines, you then hallucinate, you probably see a 3D cube. And so you build, and that's the way consciousness works. It's a constructive process. We actually in vision science can study consciousness and how it works with mathematical precision. And it is a constructive process. We have layer after layer of construction that's going on. And we can write down equations for a lot of this. So you probably noticed that you can see two different cubes. You can flip. How many have gotten it to flip? You see one corner in front and then it flips. A few of you? Okay. Now I'm going to prove that you actually create the glow between the way I'll do it is as follows. You can imagine these blue disks as holes in a sheet of paper. You're looking through the holes, and behind you see a cube. How many got that one now? Did you notice that the glow of the lines disappeared? Now if you put the cube in front, the glow will come back. And that proves that your visual system is creating the conscious experience on the fly of the lines and whether they're glowing or not. It's all you. One last demonstration. The top and the bottom, the same shade of gray or different? Clearly, they look quite different. This is due to Bo Lotto and Dale Purves. The top looks dark, the bottom looks light. If you take your finger, close one eye, and put it on the boundary between the two, you'll see for yourself that they're identical. So your visual system is, again, creating the raw shades of gray that you see, and it's not getting it correct, so to speak. So that's just a few demonstrations that you create all that you see. It's a constructive process. As a backup, I had them in Keynote just in case. Another demonstration, these little bars, those are entirely hallucinated by your visual system. There's no motion and there's no bars. All I'm doing is changing the colors of individual dots from black to blue and blue to black. And your visual system is hallucinating the glowing blue bars and the motion. It's all your hallucination. We saw that. So, what I've told you so far is standard neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience. Vision is construction. Another assumption of the field is that vision is reconstruction, that your constructions have been shaped by evolution to match the truth. When you see a 3D world with object shapes and colors, your visual system has been shaped by evolution to approximately get the right shapes, colors, and objects that are really there. So the idea is that perception estimates true properties of the physical world. Evolution guarantees that those estimates are accurate, and therefore perception is in general veridical, i.e. true. The argument is very simple. Those of our ancestors who didn't see truly were at a disadvantage compared to those who did, and so they were less likely to have kids. So we're the offspring of those who saw more truly, and therefore we see more truly. That's the argument. Seems plausible, and it's entirely false. But just to show you that this is what vision scientists believe, in the standard textbook, Stephen Palmer says that evolutionarily speaking, visual perception is useful only if it's reasonably accurate. Indeed, vision is useful precisely because it is so accurate. So it's all about accuracy, and evolution makes it so. And Geisler and Deal say the same thing, that human perception is veridical under normal conditions most of the time. So that's the standard view. How does it stand up both to empirical evidence and mathematical models of evolution? Well, here's an interesting example of a bug, the jewel beetle in Australia. The males have wing casings, as you can see, that are bumpy, glossy, and brown. The males fly. The females are flightless. And the males are flying around, of course, looking for females. And when they find an eligible female, they alight and mate. There's another species in the Australian outback, the male Homo sapiens, that likes full beer bottles and doesn't like empties, and tosses them into the desert. Now, these bottles are bumpy, glossy, and just the right shade of brown. to make these jewel beetle males quite excited, as you can see. And they're quite excited. And in fact, these males swarm the bottles, they forsake the females, and the species almost went extinct. They had to pass laws about the bottles to keep these beetles from going extinct. So now here's a species that has worked for millions of years. The males have successfully found females for millions of years and mated. One little change in their niche. You throw out a few beer bottles, and the species could have disappeared almost overnight. This is not perception that's seeing the truth. This is an animal whose perceptual systems had little simple tricks and hacks that got the job done. Truth is irrelevant. And that's the key point. Evolution is about having kids. It's not about seeing the truth. It's about fitness, not about seeing truth. So those adaptations to perception that will allow you a greater probability of having kids are the ones that will get passed on. So Steven Pinker, in How the Mind Works, I think has a better take on this. He says, our minds evolved by natural selection to solve problems that were life and death matters to our ancestors, not to commune with correctness. So the question then is, mathematically, can we look at this? And I'm not going to go into math here, but I'll just tell you. We could use something called evolutionary game theory. Evolution is a mathematically precise theory. Evolutionary game theory is one of the best formulations, also evolutionary graph theory. We can look at different perceptual strategies, including a strategy that sees truth versus a strategy that I'll call interface strategy that sees none of the truth in the external world. It's only tuned with simple tricks and hacks to fitness. What will guide my behavior without seeing the truth to stay alive long enough to have kids? I'll call that the interface, and I'll tell you more about it. You have to factor in that there are costs for time, information, and computation. There's no free information. For every bit of information that you have to spend calories. For every calorie that you use, you have to go out there, kill something, and eat it to get those calories. So the selection pressures in evolution are to make you fast and cheap in your perceptions. Fast and quick and cheap. And the bottom line is, I've been doing evolutionary game simulations with my graduate students, and we've published in the Journal of Theoretical Biology, the premier journal in this field, clear cases, clear evidence that evolution drives truth to extinction. Almost never does truth survive. If you had an organism that saw truly, it would go extinct very, very quickly. So we are not the offspring of those who saw truly. We're the offspring of those who had the nice tricks and hacks that allowed them to survive long enough to have kids. Truth goes extinct. And the interface dominates. So what do I mean by interface, and how possibly could something that doesn't show you the truth be helpful? And I think we have a nice metaphor, now that we all have laptops, that we can use here. Here's a desktop of a Mac. And on there, I've got a little icon in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. It's blue. It's rectangular in the lower right-hand corner. Does that mean that the file itself in the computer is blue or rectangular or in the lower right-hand corner of the computer? Of course not. That's a silly idea. Anybody who thought that way doesn't understand that the interface is just simply there as eye candy, so to speak, to guide your behavior so you don't have to know about the diodes and resistors and all the megabytes of software inside the computer. You don't want to know all that. If you had to know that, you couldn't write your paper, you couldn't play music, you couldn't do all the stuff you want to do. So the interface is useful because it hides the truth. It gives you a guide to adaptive behavior on a computer that is so complicated that you couldn't deal with it if you had to see the truth. And that's what I'm saying our perceptions are like. Evolution has shaped us not to see the truth. It has given us a desktop interface. Space and time are our desktop. Physical objects are simply the icons on the desktop. To ask if they're true, or my perception's true, is the same category mistake as asking, is my file in the computer really blue? It's the wrong question. It's not supposed to be that the blue represents the truth of the file. It's a useful interface. So to summarize, evolution does not favor truth. It punishes it. It drives it to extinction. Truth is irrelevant, and it's too costly. Instead, we've been shaped by natural selection to have perceptions that hide the truth, that dumb it down so that we can survive. Space-time is our desktop. Objects are simply, physical objects, 3D objects, are just the icons of our desktop. They're not the truth. And that means that there are some radical implications of this. It means that we think that the physical 3D world around us is the source of causality. If I push with my hand, this wiggles, and we think that my hand caused it. That has to be a fiction in this interface point of view. If I take an icon on my screen and drag it to the trash can, the file gets deleted. Is the actual motion of the icon on the screen causing the deletion? No. That's a useful fiction. We can think of it that way as a shorthand, but it's just a useful fiction. And so we can have a useful fiction that the 3D world around us with objects is the source of causality, but that's just a fiction that we can use to get through the day. That's what our interface is for. And here's where it gets really sticky. That means and that the brain itself, being a physical object with physical neurons, is not a source of causality either. So here's where it gets quite sticky. I do neuroscience. I've published fMRI, EEG. I study the brain. But I also maintain, based on the evolutionary game results that I've just talked about, that the brain itself has no causal abilities whatsoever. Neurons and brain activity causes none of my behavior, none of my experiences, none of my beliefs, none of my thoughts. And nevertheless, we must and should study brain activity. That's where we get our data. But the simple interpretation that the brain and its activity causes our psychology, causes consciousness, causes our behavior is just too simplistic. What we've done is we've mistaken our interface for the truth. We're a species, like the cockroach. We have our particular set of perceptions. There's no reason to expect that our perceptions are the truth. So the way forward, first I'll just throw out one objection that I think people will have. They'll say, Hoffman, if you think that train coming down the tracks is just a figment, an icon of your user interface, why don't you step in front of it? And after you're gone, and your theory with you, then we'll know that the train was more than just an icon of your user of the interface. And you'll be happy to know that I won't step in front of the train for the same reason that I wouldn't take an icon on my screen and casually drag it to the trash can. If I do that, I might lose a lot of work. I don't take that icon literally. The file is not blue. But I do take it seriously. Evolution has shaped us with symbols like snakes, trains, cliffs. You better take them seriously. Those of our ancestors who didn't take them seriously didn't have kids. So you better take them seriously, but to take them seriously does not require that you take them literally. That's the logical confusion that we're prone to. We assume that taking our icons seriously entails that we must take them literally. False. And when you look at the mathematics of evolution, it makes it very, very clear. Truth will not survive. So now, going forward, C stands for consciousness. Consciousness, I propose, if the physical world isn't fundamental, it's just a desktop, then what is fundamental? I mean, we're interested in solving the mind-body problem. How is consciousness related to brain activity? If I'm saying that the brain itself does not cause any of our experiences or any of our behaviors, then it doesn't cause consciousness. So how are we going to solve the mind-body problem? I propose to go the other way. Start with consciousness first, and as a scientist, I want a mathematical model. So I don't want to just wave my hands. And so I actually do have a mathematical model that you'll be glad to know that I will not present here today. But I have a precise mathematical model for consciousness, and then the idea is to use that to derive, without hand wave, exactly the equations of physics, quantum physics and so forth. So that's the plan. I've already made some progress. I can get the wave equation of the free particle in quantum mechanics. So we're working towards general relativity and so forth, but that's the idea, to have a completely rigorous mathematical model of consciousness. The idea is, without that, we're not even wrong, right? Until you have a mathematical model, scientists shouldn't take us seriously. There's nothing for them to take seriously. It's only when you have a mathematical model that makes predictions that could be wrong that they can then tell you, well, here's why you're wrong. And that's what we want. We want to find out why we're wrong. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay, so, he's a cognitive scientist. He's published mathematical models of consciousness. And obviously, we are very sympathetic to this model, but for very clear reasons. But I want to just ask you a few questions, okay? So there's this hard problem. Right. Everything that we experience as the world, everything, whether it's sound, touch, sight, taste, or smell, which we call the world, at least on a biological basis, is electrical information going to the brain. How does it translate into this three-dimensional reality, or does it?
That's right. So if you're, can you hear me? If you look at a green apple, and then if we looked at your brain, we did a brain scan, or even more invasive, looked inside your brain, we would find nothing green in there, hopefully. I mean, if there's something green in there, there's something terribly wrong. So when you see a green apple, there's nothing green in there, but what you will see is lots of electrical activity, chemicals, ions moving through holes in membranes. No one has any idea, and you might think there's theories out there, scientific theories about how the brain causes conscious experiences, the hard problem, and that we're trying to figure out which is the right theory. We don't have any theories about how brain activity could cause consciousness. Right at the critical moment, when you have the brain activity, there'll be some model of, information, integrated information. At the key moment when you need to get consciousness, a miracle occurs, and then consciousness emerges. And at every theory that I've seen, there's always the brain activity of some type, a miracle occurs, and out pops consciousness. So there are no precise theories that don't have a miracle right at the key point, which is why they call it the hard problem. And scientists, we do have miracles in our theories, but we put them up front. Right? We say, here are the miracles, these are our assumptions. After that, you can't bring in a miracle right at the key point where you want to get consciousness to emerge. So we're clueless. So there aren't any theories, and remarkably, there are no remotely plausible ideas about how brain activity could cause consciousness. So that's why, when I started off in the field, I was a physicalist like everybody else. I thought the brain did it, and I was trained that way. But, we're like flies against the window pane. At some point, you just got to stop. And so now I've switched gears now, and it looks very, very promising. A mathematical model of consciousness can lead to physics, and I think that's a very, very promising direction to solve the hard problem.
So, Don, I'm going to ask the audience to do something very simple. Okay. Either keep your eyes open or closed, but imagine a beautiful sunset on the ocean. How many people can see a picture? Where's the picture?
Well, if you're a physicalist brain scientist, you would say that the picture has to be somehow represented in the neural activity of the brain. And by the way, there is good research on the neural correlates of consciousness. It's quite possible, they're using fMRI and EEG, for someone to look at your brain activity and to guess what it is you're imagining. That can be done. I'm not dismissing that. That's really quite good. So there are really strong correlates between brain activity and your conscious experiences. The question is not, are there correlations? There are. The question is, what is the direction of causation? Does the brain activity cause consciousness, or is it the other way around?
Okay, now, all of you, you're looking at us, right? We're on the stage, you're there. Where is the experience of me and Don for you? Where is the experience? We're on the stage, right? Where are they having that experience?
Well, the neuroscientist would say it's all in your head, right? Right. That literally you're projecting out a 3D world, but it's the nervous system that's actually doing it. So that your experience, and by the way, there's a wonderful story. Will Cheselden, who was the physician who attended Isaac Newton at his death, did a surgery on a boy who was born blind. He had cataracts. Around age 13 or 14, he had the cataracts removed without anesthesia. No, thank you. And for about 2 or 3 months, the boy saw the world in his eyes. It was only after about 3 months that all of a sudden he said, oh, the world is out there now. And if you think about it, it's, when we touch, we feel the touch on the receptor that's feeling the touch. But in the case of vision, we see it out there. And this boy made it really clear that it took 2 or 3 months for him to get to put it out there. So the neuroscientists would say that it's your brain doing it, but I've given good reasons to believe that the brain is doing nothing.
Okay, let's go a little further, if you don't mind. You say mathematical model, right?
Yes.
Where's mathematics?
Very good question. There's a very important question that you could ask of me that could destroy my whole program. I said that if you take evolution seriously and use evolutionary game theory, it leads to the conclusion that our perceptions are not true. The next question would be, well, if that does the same thing to your mathematics and logic, then the logic that led you to evolution is wrong, right? You've refuted yourself. Well, it turns out you have to be very, very careful. When you actually do the evolutionary game simulations, it does lead to perception not being true, but selection pressures do not push us away from true mathematics and logic. They actually do push us towards true mathematics and logic. And so some of the arguments that are going on now between Alvin Plantinga and others about does evolution lead to reliable cognitive faculties or not? And the debate's going back and forth. It turns out that the debate is fruitless because the term reliable cognitive faculties is too broad. We have lots of different faculties, and evolution does different things to different faculties. Perception, it moves away from the truth. Logic and mathematics, it doesn't push away from the truth. So now we can't do broad brush. We have to actually do our homework, do the evolutionary game simulations, evolutionary graph theory simulations, and actually find out what does evolution predict for each one of our cognitive and perceptual faculties.
So you said that visual perception is a construction, right?
Yes.
Which means space and time are a construction.
That's right.
You know, the Vedanta would say that space and time are constructs that give us the illusion of separation.
Absolutely.
Both in space and time. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Yes. I would say that space and time are not fundamental aspects of an objective reality that exists independent of us. That space and time are a species-specific adaptation. They're a way that a particular species, Homo sapiens, gets through life long enough to have kids and survives long enough to have kids. Now, the burden on us who are trying to take consciousness as fundamental is to give a mathematically precise theory of consciousness and then explain with precision how the dynamics of that consciousness can be represented, say, with a space-time model of the kind that we have, and why that would actually give us some measure of fitness while hiding the truth.
So again, going back to wisdom traditions, the perceptual world is frequently referred to as Maya, as what you call the hallucination.
Right.
So we're all, in a sense, perceptually hallucinating each other's physical existence, right?
We are, and I guess one way that you can think about this idea is when you look in the mirror, what you see is literally skin deep, right? You see your eyes, your skin, your lips, your hair. What you don't see directly in the mirror are your hopes, your aspirations, your dreams, your love of music, your fears. All of that, which is your conscious experience, is not visible in the mirror. The mirror is a dumbed down. By the way, you all look beautiful. But what you see on the mirror is not the deeper reality. You see just what skin deep. It's a user interface representation. When you smile, you can infer that the conscious experience behind the smile is one of happiness. If there's a frown, you can infer that it's one of sadness. But that's an inference. You don't directly see the conscious experience. You infer it from the face. And so every time you look in the mirror, you actually have an example firsthand of the difference between what you can see in the physical world and the consciousness that lies behind it.
Don, the perceptual apparatus must have something to do with the experience, because if there's an insect with 100 eyes, and there are such species, I don't think the insect is having the experience that I'm having when I look at you.
I would absolutely agree. So I would say, as I talked about space and time as a Homo sapiens specific user interface, every different species will have its own interface. And even among us, I mean, evolution with its random mutations guarantees that your perceptions, although they're probably very similar to mine, are not identical. That's the variation that we need in natural selection to evolve. So every different species will have a very, very different user interface. So there are as many universes out there, so, quote unquote, as there are perceptual systems of different organisms.
So there's no such thing as the look of the world?
No, there's, in fact, there would only be the look as seen from the user interface of one species and another. And by the way, it's in terms of interfaces that you can actually understand biology, predation, camouflage. It's every animal is exploiting the weaknesses of the interface of someone else, while the others are trying to exploit their interfaces and its weaknesses. And the evolution game is okay, now that they're killing me. I need to, I'm anthropomorphizing it. Evolution doesn't talk this way. But intuitively, it's sort of like, they're killing me. I need to evolve my interface so I won't get killed in that way. And so what's really going on, apart from the anthropomorphism, is that it's a evolutionary arms race, one interface against another.
1 second, Jim. So bottom line, what we see is not what is.
Yeah, what we see is what's useful to keep you alive. It's not the truth. It's like the desktop. What's useful, the icon is blue. Why? Not because the file is blue, just because it's useful. It helps you. The icon is square. Why? Not because the file is square. And the same thing is true of objects. They have 3D shape. Why? Because the fundamental nature of reality is 3D? No. And even physicists are thinking that the fundamental nature of reality is not 3D. Gerard de Hooft proved that the amount of information that can be contained in any volume of space is not proportional to the volume, it's proportional to the area surrounding the space. In some sense, the third dimension is irrelevant to how much content of information there is, only the areas. So
Jim?
Already there's some suspicion about 3D.
Jim Carrey? Say hi to Jim Carrey, please.
Jim.